say Africa controls majority of African population is young people. That is why it's young people. They want to be in vogue. As a matter of fact, many young Africans are comfortable with buying second-hand clothes in order to follow the Western fashion without necessarily spending huge amounts of money. It is a major obstacle. It is a major obstacle, and it's a nightmare for most designers and dressmakers in Africa because of various examples that we have also narrated: infrastructural challenge and not getting the right technology and machinery. But Ethiopia has an objective to generate 30 billion in export revenue from textile and apparel and accessory sector by 2030. This country has invested in industrial park, we all know it, and this will accelerate the process. So can we replicate what Ethiopia has done across the value chain? Well, we'll see what Mr. Andrew will give us. But Mr. President Paul Kagame of Rwanda decided in 2016, against all odds, with Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and these three countries, decided to gradually suspend the importation of second-hand clothes. We know what Washington did. Swiftly, Washington moved into and threatened to withdraw these countries from AGOA, an agreement that has guaranteed these countries of Africa to export to the US at zero cost tariff between 2015 and 2023. We know what that threat did. Some countries withdrew. In a way, they will say they are benefiting because they are still exporting to the US. But Rwanda stood its ground because it's committed to developing the textile industry. This brings me to the question, Mr. Andrew. What is your perspective of the impact of the second-hand clothes on the production capacity of Rwanda and East African countries in the cotton and clothing and textile value chain? The second question is this. Please, the second question is because my background and putting things into context is tied in to the second question. What role can external trading partners such as the US, the EU under EPA and EU under EPA play in supporting African countries to become competitive producers of textile and clothing rather than undermining their productive capacity?
But I think there's an important misnomer in terms of what global value chains really are. There was a very important article by the trade economist Richard Baldwin a few years ago, where he pointed out that actually global value chains are really the exception and that most are anyway regional value chains. So he talked about how the majority of trade undertaken in Asia is within the Asian continent. So China is at the center of a very complex system of sourcing and intermediate goods from neighboring countries such as Vietnam, Indonesia, and for higher income countries like Japan and South Korea. So it's really, he started talking about, it's a factory Asia. And in Europe, they have a similar production system, factory Europe, and in North America, factory North America. And what was lacking really was a factory Africa from his analysis. Yeah, and to the extent that the continent doesn't really have sufficient intra-regional production networks. And that's what we hope the AfCFTA will provide. And I think in the textile sector, there's a lot of arguments why that would come into being. It's estimated that globally imports of secondhand clothing are around $4 billion currently. And in countries like Uganda now, 80% of clothing that is purchased is now estimated to be secondhand clothing. So clearly it's very difficult for regional producers to compete with the secondhand clothing as it now stands. And as you mentioned in your question, there was this issue in 2016 of a common agreement amongst East Africa Community member states to actually put prohibitive tariffs and restrictions on the import of secondhand clothing. And that agreement was reached by the EAC member states collectively.